Hello and welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. It's Friday, which can mean only one thing. My name's Laura Bradburn. I'm joined, as always, by Jim Orr and Anthony Haggerty. How you doing, guys?
Good, Laura, yeah, good.
Very well, Laura, thank you.
Good. Quiet week again, yeah. Nothing much to talk about. We were thinking about just sacking it off today, but, you know, got to do what you got to do. No, before we get into the big news, I think everybody's talking about, Tony, you just wanted to mention something about wee Riley that we talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago. She was obviously going through some health troubles, and you just wanted to update the folks on it.
Yeah, I did. I get sent a tweet by Riley's uncle, Kerr, and he sent me this last week, but it had gone after the show. She said Riley's operation was a tremendous success, and she's in the process of getting out of the hospital as we speak. She'll be in her own bed tonight. I just wanted to say a huge thank you for the support from the ACSOM family. It will never be forgotten. He just wanted us to share the news with the rest of the team and everybody out there. So that's absolutely wonderful news and a lovely way to start the programme, I think.
Brilliant.
Good.
Nothing like your own bed, Riley. I can vouch for that. So I hope you're happy at home and you're getting lots of hugs and cuddles, because after everything that's happened, I think you deserve it. But no, good thoughts from everybody at Celtic State of Mind, and thanks to everybody for their kind words towards the family. I'm sure they really appreciated it, and they did say so. So we'll move on to the football news that has rocked Scotland, I think, in the last 24 hours. Not to be too dramatic, but Scott Brown, our captain of the last 10, 11 years, a player for the last 14 or so years, has announced that he will be leaving at the end of the season to go to Aberdeen, as had been rumoured, to team up with Stephen Glass in a player-coach role. Obviously, it's massive, massive news. It's probably about the biggest thing that could have happened to the club besides Peter Lawwell leaving, and that's happened in the same season. So before I come to Tony and Jim on their thoughts on everything, I just wanted to run through a few of the stats. Now, I know everybody watching will... some of the people watching will have seen on Twitter that personally I have my reservations about Scott Brown. I'm not too devastated to see him leaving, but you know, today's not a day for that. Today's a day for celebrating everything that he's done for the club and everything that we're going to lose by not having him. So I'll go through some of the amazing stats that I read that just put into context exactly how big an impact he's had. He was signed from Hibs for £4.4 million in 2007, which I believe is still a record transfer fee between two Scottish clubs for a player. He's made 613 appearances over 14 years at the time of the broadcast. He's the third longest serving current player at a single club in Scotland, so he's just behind Lewis Stevenson at Hibs and Andrew Constantine at Aberdeen, so that's both obviously a former and possibly future teammate that we're talking about there. He's 7th ranked in all-time Celtic appearances, and he has the most European appearances for Celtic at 127 appearances. 10 Scottish Premiership titles, 6 Scottish Cups, 6 Scottish League Cups. He's the second most decorated captain in Celtic history. He won 19 titles as a captain at the time of the broadcast versus Billy McNeil's 23. He's been in the PFA Scotland Team of the Year 6 times. He's been the PFA Scotland Players Player of the Year twice, in 2009 and 2018, and he's been the SFWA Footballer of the Year in 2017-18. Unbelievable stats when you write them down, and I have to say it made me rethink a lot of the things that I've said about him over recent times, because at the end of the day, when the future history books are written, that is what you're going to remember about him. You're not going to remember some of the more niggling things that are insignificant things that I may be going about. Jim, I'll come to you first. Big change for the club, but more importantly just now, what impact do you think Scott Brown's had on the club as both a player and a captain?
Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And I think I said last week I would much rather that he stayed. I think that's tons and tons of experience you just mentioned there, and that's all been lost now. And I think that's invaluable, and I think we've rid of too many people over the past 4 or 5 years that would have made a big difference. But always remember when we signed Scott Brown, he didn't have much of a first season, to be honest, and I kind of wondered why we'd signed him at the time. I think Gordon Strachan took him from a kind of box-to-box player and made him a far more defensive type player. I think it took 2 or 3 years to get used to that, because at the time when we signed him, he was good pals with Kevin Thompson at the time. And I always thought we signed the wrong player. I thought Kevin Thompson was more of a Celtic player. You know, he looked to me a bit like kind of Alan Thompson, Tommy Burns type of player. You know, dictates the play from midfield for us. But Scott Brown was a bit of a kind of box-to-box player, a good player, but I also thought Kevin Thompson was the better. And when you look back on that, you think, well, what might have been, because at the time, the word in the street was Scott Brown was going to the other side, and there was strong rumours that was what was going to happen. So that's one of those sliding doors moments. What might have happened if he'd have ended up over there, you know? And obviously, he'd have been paid a lot more money over there, because that was a tax haven at the time. And but yeah, I mean. Also, it's an inspired move by Mowbray to make him captain, because I didn't think he was captain material. And you think about Mowbray, Mowbray wasn't at the club that long, and both times he was there, but he did 2 significant things in the Celtic history. He was the guy that came up with the huddle at the time, and he was the guy that made Scott Brown captain. So there's 2 very significant things that he's done. The number of times he's played, Scott Brown, over 600 games for Celtic, in the heart of the midfield, where it's pretty tough. That's where the boots are flying in there. Particularly nowadays in the modern game, it's kind of high intensity. It's, you know, every game's like a must-win game, and he's a bit of a target for a lot of players as well. To survive that long, he's had more than 50 caps for Scotland. I've never met the guy, but people who I know who have met him say he's a fantastic guy as well. So I'm really sad to lose him. I think we could really do with him next year.
Tony, I think what Jim says there will echo the thoughts of a lot of Celtic supporters. You know, when you look at on paper exactly what he's achieved with the club, you can't deny that there's going to be something major missing. I take it you sort of share those views on Scott Brown, and I think if I'm right in saying that you were sort of in the boat that you would have rather kept him in some capacity next year anyway.
Yeah, I echo what Jim said about the experience and what you're throwing away there. But another astonishing stat that I read yesterday was Scott Brown won a trophy every 28 games in his Celtic career. It's utterly astonishing. A trophy every 28 games. That is incredible.
All the more astonishing considering how long he's played for us as well. I mean, that's crazy.
You know, so that's an astonishing stat. And one that probably won't be equalled. As you said at the top of the programme, 2 Celtic captains have won 9 in a row. One of them's Scott Brown, the other one's Billy McNeill. That's esteemed company that you're keeping there. Esteemed company. And regardless of your thoughts about him as a footballer, you know, people will say, was he the most gifted? Was he the most talented? But this guy put up with a hell of a lot. Jim mentioned it there in passing. Every time Scott Brown went onto a football field for Celtic, he was carrying the team's hopes, the fans' hopes, as the leader, as the captain. But he was also having to look around for what player in the opposition was going to do him, because he couldn't be quiet. So he invited trouble. So he had to contend with that. He also had to contend with every opposition fans hating him. He was hated. You know, he's the kind of guy, if he's in your team, you love him. And if he's not in your team, you hate him. And people, fans cheering because an opposition player nobbled him. Not because they scored. Cheering because an opposition player sunk the boot into Scott Brown. That was worthy of cheers from opposition fans. So he's contending with all of this as well. You know, and he loved all that. He loved the comp. He dished it out. He could take it. Never always won every battle. You know, there's the of Scott Arfield doing the Brunei, and he took it because most of the time he took it because he was winning, and he could handle it. He just thought, okay, I'll give you your moment. There's the Ross County Kovacevic where he's like that to Kovacevic. Kovacevic just planted the boot on him and won a tackle, and Kovacevic is celebrating as if he's just scored the winning goal. And Scott Brown's went like that. Yes, you won a tackle against me. I mean, that's incredible, the effect that he had on opposition players and opposition fans. Absolutely incredible that they win a challenge against him, or they win something, or they hurt him in any shape or form, or they do something that upsets him. It's cause for celebration. What did Scott Brown do? He got on with it. And your celebration, the iconic celebration with El Hadji Diouf, just cemented him in the hearts and minds of the Celtic fans, because El Hadji Diouf, and I think a lot of Rangers supporters will admit this as well, he wasn't a footballer that was well liked. You know, if push came to shove, he had a despicable nature to his character when he spat at a Celtic supporter playing for Liverpool. So to do that in front of El Hadji Diouf at Ibrox, I was on that Endless Celts podcast last night, and I said, he may as well have just revealed a t-shirt saying, "I'm Scott Brown, what are you going to do about it?" And that was his mantra from then on in. For 10 years, he bossed Scottish football. And there's an interest, I was looking through quotes, and a cracking quote, and from the most unlikely source, Ebue Kouassi said this about Scott Brown: "Brendan Rodgers is Celtic boss in name, Scott Brown Celtic boss by nature." I thought, what a quote. That sums up Scott Brown. I think Jim would agree with that. And the moniker that they had yesterday, captain, leader, legend. Yep. And if you're going to get all emotional and schmaltzy about it, Dead Poet Society, I think Scott Brown in 14 years is the definition of, "Oh, captain, my captain." And it leaves a massive void at Celtic.
I think also when Laura gave us our homework last night to go and think about Scott Brown, a couple of things occurred to me. Big tick. Up all night thinking of things. And the first one that came to mind was the first time that I'd ever seen Scott Brown, or the first time I'd ever noticed Scott Brown. And that was a few weeks before Black Sunday. I'm sure Tony remember that well. I don't know, you, Laura, you're still too young for that, 2005.
No, I remember it.
Where we'd just come off beating Rangers at Ibrox 2-1. Craig Bellamy scored the goal.
Yeah.
And we'd 4 games to go, and 9 points would do the league. And Hibs came to Celtic Park under Mowbray, really young, attack-minded Hibs team, and beat us 3-1. And Scott Brown was outstanding that day, box to box, very kind of Stan Petrov type of game. Scored a really good goal, and that's the first time I'd noticed Scott Brown. So he was to blame. He was partly to blame for what happened in Black Sunday, because if we beat Hibs that day, I'm pretty confident we won the league that year. So that was one thought I had. Another thought I had was, I think you could easily say that Scott Brown has been the player of the last decade. And that then got me thinking that, see, if you go back the decades, it's actually quite difficult to pick a player of a decade. I don't mean for Celtic, I mean in Scottish football. You know, you can say, well, from 2010 to 2019, Scott Brown's the player of the decade. If you go 2000 to 2009, who's the player of the decade? We say, well, Larsson was obviously exceptional, but he was only here for like 4 of those years. You know, so back to the 90s, back to the 80s, the 70s, 60s, it becomes more and more difficult. And I think he stands alone. Stands alone.
Yeah, and you know, you talk about moments as well, and you know me, and people remember goals and stuff, but do you know what? A lot of people didn't give credit to what it's due, because he was a better footballer than a lot of people thought. And see his pass at Ibrox for Dembele, that 60-yard, 70-yard pass, and Dembele takes a touch and flicks it over the goalkeeper, and it coins that phrase, "What's the goalie doing, Tom?" from Hugh Byrne. You know, but to actually execute that pass while Candace comes in and cements him, and the Rangers fans are cheering, and 2 seconds later it's in the... But if you look at that footage, he looks up and he sees Dembele going, and he pings it. I mean, he hits a perler of a pass 70 yards. You know what I'm like when I'm past. I said it with Dembele as well, but that particular game, 2 cracking moments in that game were, you know, define you as a footballer. He knows Candace is coming in to clog him. He looks up and he shells a shot. See if Koeman or somebody does that, or Van Dijk, people talk about it for years. It's a moment in time that's largely gone unnoticed and unspoken about, but it's a brilliant pass. Dembele just kind of cushions it with his side and just dinks a lovely ball over the goalkeeper. But to actually do that in a split second that he had, you know, that's the kind of quality that were not noticed in Scott Brown, but the things he could do. You know, a lot of the time we said it off air that his passing could be erratic, but when he got it right, he got it right. And there was a brain there, and there was a footballer, and as Jim said, the charging midfielder that came from Hibs, he had another brilliant game for Hibs when Ivan Sproul scored a hat-trick at Ibrox, and I think he set up 2 of those goals by charging 70 yards down the pitch and releasing the ball. And that was the kind of player that I remember as well when we first brought Scott Brown to my attention under Mowbray. So, you know, a lot of magnificent qualities, and he will be sadly missed. And I said as well that I think a lot of Celtic supporters, there was a great disturbance in the force that they thought he was going to leave, and I think a lot of them still feel that way today.
I think I can't disagree with that, and I think, from my point of view, I said at the top of the show, I'm not one of his biggest fans, but listening to you guys talk about him, looking through the stats that I've looked through, I have to sit here and admit in front of everybody watching on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter, I have to eat some humble pie, because, you can't argue with what's presented before you when you reflect on his career and what he's done. Jim, I'll come to you on this point. We've talked about how opposition players, opposition fans often cheered when he got clattered or when he did something wrong. And the one thing that says to me is he managed to get in their heads. He managed to make a spectacle enough of himself that they were almost distracted by him while other players were able to create and do that kind of thing. Do you think that's going to be a big loss for us going forward, that you don't have that presence in the team that I can think of, where they're going to be thinking, we'll get stuck into Scott Brown or we'll wind him up or we'll do that, and distracting from some of the other players? What do you think of that?
As I said earlier, I think it's absolutely huge. I think 90% of football is mental. Don't mean mental, it's psychological, basically. It's all in the head. And Scott Brown, is mentally tough. And you need that kind of mental toughness to play for Celtic. And a lot of players have fallen by the wayside because they don't have that mental toughness. And if you've got him there, and all the players speak very highly of him, all the new players that come in speak very highly of him. So he's somebody that tries to make sure that the players get it. And not so much about, this is the history of Celtic Football Club, but this is what it means to play. This is the kind of pressures you're going to be under game after game after game after game. And my concern is there's nobody there just now who can actually do that job. I haven't a clue who that's going to be. And we can talk about Ayer maybe being the new captain if he stays, but Ayer's not that kind of person. I don't think Callum McGregor is that kind of person. James Forrest isn't that kind of person. So I think that's a big loss. And I think he would be there to help any the new manager, whoever that may be, coming in. Whether he played or not, I don't think that was that important. I think actually just him being there. And I think it would be a huge boost to the club he's going to. I think that's an astonishing signing that they've made, both as a player and as a coach. I think he's been very clever in the moves that he's made. Hibs a couple of years, 2 or 3 years at Hibs. He could have left Celtic a number of times. There's a few times, was it not? Spurs were interested at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Newcastle,
I think as well, yeah.
And Juve, somebody mentioned Juve at 1 year, but anyway, he's going to manage his career really, really well. He could have stayed over another year. I think if I was him, I would quite fancy that move. I think that's a really good first step in the ladder. I think he might have been thinking, I wouldn't use that much next year, but I think our loss is much more than his. That's why I'd have kept him.
Tony, I think the more that the discussion's going on, it's becoming more apparent that, Aberdeen are obviously gaining a great player, a player who has done so much for us as a club. I'm seeing a few people, Nicola Stubborn on YouTube has commented, who's the next captain then? And that just kind of contributes to the conversation that we're having around how we replace him. How do we fill that gap, and what he brings so much more than he's on the field persona, but he's off the field persona as well. I think we've had this discussion a few times, but who do you think do we currently have that can fill that gap, or do we not have anybody? Is there somebody we need to go out and find?
You're struggling really, aren't you? Because I don't think Callum McGregor's that person. Callum McGregor's been there a long time. You think it'd be an actual progression to go into that captain's role, but you're losing a born winner in Scott Brown. And I look around that Celtic team and I don't see, like Jim's just alluded to there, born winners or guys that can instill what it means to play for a club like Celtic. That mental toughness, that mental fortitude. And remember, Scott Brown had a terrible tragedy off the field as well with his sister. Don't particularly want to dwell on that, but these things are all grow you into your football, like part of your makeup, and that how you can move on with things like that, and and I'm not saying you never forget something like that, but to actually go about your day-to-day business when something tragic like that happens, it's testament to his strength of character that he did that, and he made the success of his career that he did at Celtic. Maybe the only blip would be European record, which wasn't great, but again, that's nitpicking. But in terms of a born winner and a leader and an inspirational figure, you look around, the Celtic are shorn of them in the dressing room. A lot of people are saying try to throw names at you, go and get the boy Alan Campbell from Motherwell, even Lewis Ferguson from Aberdeen's been mentioned, guys like that. But you turn around and you think, well, Celtic might have to bring in those, not saying those particular players, but they're just ones off the top of their head that people are throwing out right away. But Celtic might have to bring in winners, people that can understand straight off the bat what it means to play for Celtic. Jim said there, don't know if Julian's that guy. I think he's a great influence, but I don't know if he's that person just yet. Ayer might leave, Edouard might leave, so there's a big void going to be left at the club. You have to fill it with people to replace Scott Brown. So that's your big problem with Scott Brown going to Aberdeen. That gap, that void, that kind of what's been left there, and he was Brendan Rodgers' go-to guy when he came in. Brendan Rodgers said, right, give me the lowdown, and they had that infamous meeting where they were moving the salt and pepper dishes around, at a table in a restaurant or in his house. He would have been the ideal sounding board for the new management team to say, fill me in, who do we keep, what do we do, where do you see your own role here, and I don't think Scott Brown could have accepted a peripheral role at Celtic, a back part player. He's a big voice, he's a big character, which is maybe why he's chosen to go to Aberdeen, because he'll still be able to play as well as do his coaching badges and, enhance his coaching reputation. And all being well, he'll come back to Celtic in a coaching capacity and he'll be welcomed back with open arms. He certainly will. And I just hope that, Aberdeen's gain is very much Celtic's loss. And I struggle just now to name a Celtic captain, somebody who's going to automatically step into the breach. I really do.
Yeah. I think if Shane Duffy had worked out, the way we hoped to work out, he'd have been an obvious choice, and that might have been a bit of a carrot for him to stay for maybe a couple of years. But obviously, that's all fell apart. But you never know. There might be some sort of left field choice, in the same way Scott Brown was a kind of left field choice. You would never imagine. I would have never imagined he'd get the captaincy at that time. So you never know. It could be a David Turnbull or something like that. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, Jim, we've talked about his mental strengths and what he brings to the club. I have to admit, I get shivers watching one of the videos back where he said on his opening interview that his intention was to become a Celtic legend, and I don't think anybody can argue that he's achieved that. He certainly has. But leaving aside what he obviously brings in terms of mentality and attitude, I think he definitely feels he still has something to offer on the field, and I think, as Tony says, that's probably why he's taking the move to Aberdeen, because he maybe thinks he'll get more of a chance there to still execute that. But looking at Celtic's play going forward, I think we can all agree that in the later years especially, he did slow the play down a little bit. He did. There was maybe other players who had better passing ability, better shooting ability, that kind of thing. What do you think his exit will signify for us purely from a playing point of view, a tactics point of view, and how we handle matches going forward?
Well, I think he was one of our best players last Sunday, so I don't think he's playing particularly badly. And I think maybe under a different manager, I think he would have been absolutely fine. I think there was a time where, just before Rodgers came, he was going through a bit of a dip. And I think at that point, if he'd have left, he wouldn't be that bothered. But I think he's still got a lot to give. And I think he's still got a lot to give. And that, as I said, I thought he was good last Sunday. What was the question? There's a bit of a noise behind me, sorry.
No, the question was, how do you think, we've talked about the mental side of his game and how that's obviously going to be a big loss, but from a physical on the park sense, how do you think losing him will change our style of play? Do you think it will be majorly affected, or do you think it will be something that will be majorly affected by the other changes going on at the club anyway?
I think there'll be so many changes, Laura, we don't know how that's going to pan out. We just have to see. I think we've said before there'll be a major new build coming up. We could have a completely new mid for all we know. So it's a bit of a mystery to everyone how that's going to pan out. And the fact that though you have a manager, we have no idea how it's going to pan out. So who knows?
I think that's a fair one. And looking at the banner that we've got here, Tony, Brown to follow Lawwell and Lennon out. Now, there's a lot of fans at the start of the season would have been happy to end the season with this having happened, 10 in a row or not. Do you think it's a case of be careful what you wish for? Are you anxious about so many big changes happening at one time, or do you think this is a chance for a clean slate, a fresh start, and to build something more in line with what other modern clubs are doing?
There is an argument for both, but I'll say this. Brendan Rodgers said about Scott Brown, on the field and in the changing room, Scott gives his life to Celtic. If you were going to war, he's the first one you'd take with you. Why would any new management team not want to work with Scott Brown for a year anyway and help that transition? That decision baffles me. He's got so much to offer still. Maybe not in the playing sense, but certainly just in a coaching sense, and just telling the new management structure what's what and how every player is, and assess all the players. You know, I just his presence alone creates a big gap, and you know, you just sort of Celtic are now there is a major rebuild happening here, but you're having to replace big figures. You know, your CEO is gone. Don't know much about Dominic Mackay. He hasn't spoken yet, hasn't assumed his role. The manager's gone. You know, you're still fumbling around in the dark trying to appoint a manager. All sorts of names being flung into that, you know, category and managerial ring. So you're just like, oh, you know, at this moment in time, Celtic are rudderless, managerless, captainless, and you sort of wonder if they're directionless. And that worries you greatly, because I keep going back to it. It's 85 days or something till the first Champions League qualifier. Where's the structure? Where's the plan? What's happening? And every day that goes by, you're missing a chance to get people in and start building and getting these players in, replacing the likes of Scott Brown, talking to the guys who, excuse me, are on the cusp of leaving. You know, depending on who the manager is that comes in, maybe persuading them to stay. But none of this is happening. Time's of the essence, and you worry about Celtic getting the appointment right and then having any kind of plan moving forward. Jim's a big advocate of that. We need to know what's happening moving forward. What's the structure? What's the plan? Who's pulling the strings? But at this moment in time, we don't have the CEO in situ yet, don't have a manager in situ yet, and we've just lost our captain as well. I mean, it beggars belief, doesn't it? It really does.
I also think if you want to dominate Scottish football, every one of your players has to be feared by the opposition. Mm-hmm. And what's happened this year is very few of our players are feared by the opposition. Scott Brown was one of them who was feared by the opposition. And if you go back to the Martin O'Neill years, virtually every single player, I'm thinking Hartson, Larsson, Sutton, Lambert, Petrov, you threw the whole team, nobody wants to play against them. You look at the Celtic team this year, or what's going to be left, I think most people would fancy their chances. And that's why I think there will be this massive clear out. And it's how quickly we can gel those players together. And that'll be the key next year. I mean, I think we'll go on okay next year. I mean, we've only got one main rival. And there's no reason why we can't put a decent team together that takes care of the other teams. And I think as long as we maybe don't play the first Glasgow derby until maybe the 7th, 8th, 9th game, we get ourselves together, then I think we'll be okay next year. I think the Champions League will come too quickly. I think the Europa League might come too quickly. But I think in terms of the league, it's always a two-horse race. So you've only got one team to beat.
I agree with that to an extent, Jim, but I'd like to see things kind of happening nowish. You know, I don't know about you. You know, just sort of so we can see where we're going and see if we're going to shape up. With a kind of lack of clarity or vision or any kind of news, it's disconcerting, to say the least.
I think also to play devil's advocate, I'm not actually sure what they would say. You know, even if they announced the manager just now, I mean, if I was the new manager, I wouldn't come in just now. I would wait to the end of the season, because what I don't want to do is come in and have a few bad results and maybe get hammered at Ibrox or something like that. So I'd come in at the end of the season. So I've kind of always assumed that the manager has been picked and he's working in the background. And that's why I'm a bit concerned about all this Roy Keane stuff that's kicking about. I'd be astonished if we've not actually got the manager now. It would astonish me.
Yeah. On that point, one thing that I was reading earlier in the week that there was a lot of sort of discussion about and reflection on was the interview with Dermot Desmond that was published and the content, if you want to call it that, therein. Tony, I read it, and to be honest, didn't come out any wiser as to what the ongoing situation is at the club with regards to a plan. What did you make of the content of it, and did you glean anything from it at all, having read it?
The one thing that struck me was the due diligence process that they said that appointing any manager, what they have to go through, and it's a long, drawn out, laborious process. But that didn't strike you as being the process that they adhered to when they appointed Neil Lennon in the showers at Hampden, the Scottish Cup. So that kind of contradicted anything that had gone before in terms of the managerial appointment of Neil Lennon. That's the one thing that leapt out at me, that they say that they do all this due process and it takes time to strike a deal, but they certainly didn't do that when Neil Lennon was appointed. I'm sure Peter Lawwell was also said there was a drawer full of CVs which they refused to look at. So I know they're trying to say that this time they're doing it the right way and going to pick the right person, but are they? I think a lot of Celtic supporters have lost trust in them getting it right, or actually going through these stages and going to the right people and asking the right managers the question. So because nobody has come out and said that they've knocked it back yet, certainly to my knowledge. And the Keane, every people jumping off the Keane bus. The appointment of Keane would worry a lot of Celtic supporters. It would just worry them moving forward, and it would strike you as they've not conducted a due diligence process if that were to happen. We know one guy that's on the Keane bus, our very own ACSOM's Russell Boyce. He's jumped on the Keane bus, but I think he's also jumped on the Wenger bus because I think he likes.
He's on his own. He's on his own in that bus.
He likes the derby. I think he's on the Wenger bus. Yeah. So it's a very. It would be an unpopular choice amongst the Celtic supporters, but if that's who it is, then you're going to have to get your head around it and get with the programme and support it.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the statement, Laura, in terms of that statement they made, I think Dempsey touched a nerve. That's all it was.
Absolutely.
He was coming back at Dempsey. Yep. And I think if you've got nothing to say, don't say anything. I don't think you have anything to say. So I don't understand why he would say anything. And to get back to the Roy Keane thing, I said this last week, you're looking for somebody who, if you take Roy Keane's name out of the equation altogether, and you said we're going to replace Neil Lennon with somebody who hasn't been a manager in 10 years, you would laugh at that. You would laugh at that. And you're looking for somebody who's going to come in and drive on a modern football club. Hasn't managed for 10 years. And I've listened to the podcast during the week, and somebody made a comment yesterday, it might have been Paul, and if it wasn't, I'm sorry for saying this, but I think somebody said something like, well, if you brought in Roy Keane and brought in somebody else, that might take the sting out of it. And I'm thinking, no, we don't want stings. No stings here. Right? If we're going to appoint 3 people, we appoint 3 good people. We don't appoint 1 dodgy people and 2 people to compensate for that.
You're the best, Jim.
As far as the Roy Keane thing, sorry, Tony?
You appoint 3 of the best. That's what you do.
Aye.
We're getting a lot of comments coming through on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. John 67, I think the name was, on Twitter, saying we need to get a manager in as soon as possible. Michael McGowan on Facebook is saying Roy Keane's a winner, he's a top man. So there's a lot of conflicting attitudes and things about what's going on.
Point, Laura.
Yeah, I was just going to come to you, Jim, because I think you've talked about that before. So go ahead.
See, on that point, I've read Twitter the last couple of days, and it's full of Roy Keane would do this. Roy Keane would make them fit. Where's the evidence of that? Roy Keane would stop us losing silly goals. Where's the evidence for that? People make statements. Roy Keane was a world-class football player, one of the best in the world in the last 30 years as a football player. But as Paul has pointed out, he said less than 200 games as a manager in the English Championship. So when people say Roy Keane would do this and Roy Keane would do that, shows the evidence that says that. Because what I said last week is that the new manager has to be evidence-based. We're going to appoint this guy because of A, B, C, D, and E. And if they do that, as I said last week, and it falls flat on its face, you won't blame the board because it's evidence-based. If they take a risk and appoint a manager who hasn't managed for 10 years, I think that's a huge risk. And if it fails, the board will get slaughtered. It won't be Roy Keane. And I think most people, well, not most people, me, and people who share my view, is that if you ask me to pick between Neil Lennon and Roy Keane, I would pick Neil Lennon. And if we're saying Neil Lennon's not good enough for Celtic just now, ipso facto, Roy Keane's not good enough for Celtic. But as Tony said, I mean, whoever gets the job, you get behind the manager. And if it's the guy you wanted and he does well, you'll be saying, I told you so. And if you pick the guy you don't want and he fails, you'll be saying, I told you so.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully we get the thing sorted out as soon as possible. We all get behind the new manager and it's the right choice. And it's a appointment, not a disappointment. I'm just going to quote Tony Haggerty today. That's what we're doing.
As long as you credit the quote, you're all right. You're all right. Tony,
I don't have the book with me.
Tony, on Jim's point there about, you know, getting behind the new manager and doing that, which I think we all agree, regardless of who the choice is, we're Celtic supporters at the end of the day, that is what we will do. There's a lot of things coming out that suggest to me that there is a lot more behind the rumours of Roy Keane becoming manager, a lot more to substantiate them than previously thought. There was a lot of sources coming out yesterday saying that he has spoken to the club. Micah Richards, his Sky Sports pundit colleague, was on Twitter, maybe just on the wind-up, but was tweeting various GIFs and things like that, suggesting that it might be closer to happening. Martin O'Neill was on Celtic TV backing him outrightly before the game the other week. If it went ahead, and if we're sitting here next week talking about Roy Keane as the new manager in whatever form it is, what are the positives that he can bring? What do you think he can do to help improve the current situation? And I know I'm putting you on the spot with that one.
I'm not too sure, but I tell you what, I wouldn't like to be stared down the barrel by Roy Keane, right? But I think what Roy Keane might do is bring in players that want to play for Celtic and say to them, where do you see yourself in 2 or 3 years' time? And the correct answer to Roy Keane would be, I see myself achieving success with Celtic. See if you say, I see myself down in England, you'll be hunted, or you'll not even get to the next question. He'll walk out the room. So the one thing he will do is, I think he will, I don't know if he'll do it, because as Jim says, how do you know? But I think he might bring a culture where players, and Russell's spoken about this, will not use the club as a stepping stone. He will want to get the best players in to achieve success for Celtic. Because as a player, he achieved phenomenal success, and he gave everything to his club. Everybody talks about that performance in Turin where he was booked. He was out of Champions League final, but it didn't matter to him. He gave everything for his club that night, and it was one of the best solo individual performances you'll see in a football field. So I think Roy Keane, in terms of being a winner, I get that, and I get that he wouldn't suffer fools gladly, but he would stare down the whites of your eyes and say, are you genuinely want to play for this club, or is your eye somewhere else? You know, England or abroad. If that's the case, you're no use to me. I think he would bring that culture for a start. Well, I'd like to think he would, where Celtic want to be a progressive club, both domestically and in Europe. I'm like Jim, I can't vouch for what he would bring, having not managed for 10 years. But in terms of that alone, and he has a working relationship with Dermot Desmond. And Dermot Desmond has been a champion of this guy for a long, long time. So would Dermot Desmond be willing to back his pal to the hilt in order to say to people, as Jim has been talking about, I told you so. This was the guy I told you should have had the job years ago. So that it could have a spin-off in that sense. You know, but Roy Keane would have to have the best people working around him as well. You know, because I have my reservations about him as a Celtic manager. I really do. But as much as everybody's been negative, you have to look at the flip side and say, what positives could he bring? And I think there are certainly positives that he could bring to the table. You know, he's abrasive. Yep, he wouldn't put up with any garbage. He would back the club's corner at every opportunity. People don't like that. But as Jim said, you need people in your club that have to be feared again. I think that's a man that would be feared right, left and centre. But you have your reservation about it being a long-term project.
I think you need somebody with a completely different...
On you go.
I think you need somebody with a completely different skill set to what Roy Keane has. If it's a modern club, That doesn't work with me. And I think, you could go back to the Celtic's best ever manager, Jock Stein, would struggle to manage modern day players. And Keenan and Souness can sit in the Sky studio and talk about Paul Pogba this, Paul Pogba that. They couldn't do anything with Paul Pogba. Paul Pogba is earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. You're going to shout at Paul Pogba, he's going to ignore you. So you need a different skill set, I think. And I don't think it's about throwing lots of money at this. I think that's not a good idea either. I would rather that we didn't spend big, that we spent smarter. We shouldn't be spending 5, 6, 7 million pound on players. If we do that, we're failed. I think I've said in the podcast before that if I was in charge of Celtic, we're putting a Mickey Mouse league. I don't think we should be spending more than £3 million on any player and paying them more than 10 grand a week. That'd be my view. I think I know that'd be an unpopular view, but I think if you've got the youth system right, the development system right, the recruitment right, the scouting right, all that kind of stuff, you get all that stuff right, you shouldn't be spending silly money on players. Get young, hungry players in, develop them. Hopefully they stay there for 2 or 3 years, sell them on, make a big profit, and repeat the cycle. That's modern football, and we need somebody in who can do that. Not somebody who you say, well, we'll spend 5 million on him and 7 million on this guy and pay them silly money, and then we'll see what happens next. And the big issue would be, as I said last week, if somebody like Roy Keane comes in and fails, then you get rid of him and you start again. This is a big jigsaw, I think. And if we want to be a modern club and moving forward, if you'd have said to any Celtic fan, we want a modern club to move forward and we're going to appoint Roy Keane, you would think that doesn't make sense to me. So,
yeah. Jim, just to come back at you on that point, I totally agree that Roy Keane's apparent nature and apparent coaching style wouldn't suit a modern day type of player. I don't know if you're in any better a position to offer, because I can't think of what would be required for these modern players to get the best out of them. What do you think it takes in a modern manager to get the best out of the type of players that we've got? Or is the type of player that we've got part of the issue, and do we need to sort of scrap that as well and build from scratch?
Absolutely. If you take somebody like, think of somebody just now, a Yeti to me is as if he's not bothered. We went in there and signed somebody who hadn't kicked a ball for West Ham for a year, and we had to haggle to get the guy in and paid over £5 million for the guy, and we paid him what I'm assuming 20 grand a week, £1 million a year. How do you motivate that guy? Don't sign him in the first place. Go out there and get young, hungry players. Don't buy players over the age of 23. Say, get your scouting network sorted out. That's where I'd go with this. I just think when you start paying players big money, then they lose a bit of focus. They lose a bit of incentive. You might want 1 or 2 of those kind of players in your team, but you don't want loads of players getting paid silly money. And that's where I think we went wrong. I mean, when we paid 9 million for Eddie and 7 million for Julian, I couldn't believe we were paying that kind of money. Because that's big money for a club that's only got a turnover of usually about 60, 70 million pounds if we're not in the Champions League. So we have to. Sorry, Tony, you go.
No, go, Carl, finish. Sorry, I thought you finished.
No, you go.
I'm saying, see that what you've spoken about there. I think that would be more palatable to the Celtic supporters if they'd won the 10. That this kind of new direction that they're taking. I think they're still shaken and hurt by not winning the 10. That they just they're not open to anything at the moment except for instant regaining of the title and success. But had they won
something Tony, that might also get in the way is the fact that if it is automatic Champions League qualification next year, then we're playing for some big money next year. So you have to hit the ground running. Yeah. I think last year, I think this season we've been trying to play for history. Next year we're playing for money, playing for big money. Yeah. So I could understand maybe if you want to bring in a Roy Keane and throw lots of money at him, it's a 1 year thing.
Yeah.
And so you're going to leave the vision thing until next year. Yeah. If that's the plan, then fair enough, that's the plan.
And I think it'd have been more palatable and more sellable had they won the 10. I think people would have seen, right, okay, we've won the 10, we're going to embark on a new era and a new direction, and I think the Celtic supporters would have been all in with that. I think it's just the fact that the way the 10's collapsed and now they're just hurting and they want answers. And as you say, next season is pivotal a season in Celtic's history to get instant money for the Champions League group stages by winning the title. And as you've rightly said, you only need to beat one team. So they have to make a decision on whether it's a long-term project or short-term gain, and then start your longer-term project. That's the big thing that Celtic now have to work out and decide.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the discussion. Sorry, on you go, Jim.
They have to either stick or twist. Basically, throw loads of money and try and win the Champions League this year. That's what they try and get into the Champions League this year, or start from scratch and take a chance. And Celtic's never been a club to speculate to accumulate. Are we going to go out and spend 10, 15 million pound this year in the hope of getting that 30 million pound bonus at the end of the year? We've never done that before.
Mm-hmm. I think, Tony, just to... Sorry, Tony, just to come back to you on some of that, if we all agree that a long-term plan is probably the most desirable one, as it would be for any club, because it's the one that gives you the infrastructure for success, would you be on board with a short-term sort of twist, if you like, where we just do something in the short term just to wrestle the dominance back, or are you quite happy to kind of forgo any short-term gains for the long-term gain?
I don't think the Celtic supporters are inclined to put up with any particular period of Rangers dominance. Mm-hmm. I think the short-term twisting, I think this is a season to short-term twist if you're going to do it, because of what's at stake. You automatically get into the Champions League group stages and you get 30 million quid, or 35 million quid. You are playing, as Jim says, for money. It's points. What do points make? Points make prizes this time. So it's 35 million quid. The club could then do their restructure and their remodel. So, in terms of that, then it might be worth doing that. You speculate to accumulate, as Jim says, but which they haven't really done. But I think it's because of the nature of this season's collapse. The fans just want this title wrestled back from Rangers. They don't want to see any period of Rangers dominance or any chance that they could get back in the ball game, as they say. And you only do have to beat one team. So maybe Jim's right. You maybe don't have to spend an absolute fortune, but you have to spend wisely, and you have to spend money on bringing in players that are good enough to beat Rangers. Bottom line.
I think that Champions League qualification is the big game changer.
Yeah.
If there was no automatic qualification, I think people maybe would get on board with let's maybe try something different. But that 30 million carrot lying at the end of the season, then do we spend 15 and try and double our money? But what if we don't, and you've lost 15 million pounds and you're back to scratch? So therein lies the Pepsi challenge for the guy.
That's the one that's going to focus the minds, isn't it, Jim?
Aye, yeah.
Jim, to come to you on that point, I watched David. He was a guest on the show on Wednesday with Colin and Amy, and it was his... he was quite optimistic that he doesn't think, even for the disaster of a season that we've had, that we are as far away from Rangers as they were. Certainly, I think Rangers are not going to put in the performances or the consistency of performance next season that they have this season. Do you think maybe we're still too fresh from a lot of the wins this season, and that actually things aren't as bad as they look? Or do you think there is a lot of work to be done to get us back near the levels we've been at?
Well, I think usually I get people look at me as a kind of negative guy and a bit pessimistic, which I'm not at all, away from this podcast. But I think we'll win the league next year. There you go. I think we'll win the league. And the reason I think that is because, as you said, Lauder, the current year's champions have had an extraordinary season. Extraordinary season. When we had the invincible season with 106 points, the following year with 82 points, we dropped 24 points. I don't expect them to drop 24 points, but I think they'll be around about the 90-point mark next year. I think they'll end up this year with just over 100 points, say. And everything's went their way. Red cards, penalties, COVID, injuries. The whole thing's went their way. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're well-deserved champions. I'm not trying to make excuses. But all that stuff's not going to go their way next year. They're not going to play that well next year. So I can see them dropping 10, 12 points, and they end up winning about the 90-point mark. And then we dropped silly points this year at places we would never drop points at. And it's understandable if you drop points at Easter Road, Pataudry, in Rugby Park, but drawing points to Livingston and St Johnstone at home and all that sort of stuff. We'll end up with 80 points-ish, and I think we could put another 9-10 points on the board. That would give us 90 points each. So I think there's not much in it next year, even if we have to start with a new team. Because as I said, if we can't put a team together to beat, 10 other teams out there who have got a fraction of our resources, there's something badly wrong, no matter who the manager is. And it's down to 4 Glasgow derbies. And if we were to win the first Glasgow derby next year, we're off to a flyer. So I don't see it as that difficult. But my focus every year is not domestically, it's Europe. And we've been, most seasons have been pretty hopeless. And as Tony alluded to earlier, about one of the Scott Brown's things that he's kind of thought, I wish we'd done a bit better in Europe in my time at Celtic. And also maybe from an international point of view, the fact he never played in a major tournament. But I think we'll be there or thereabouts, just based on that kind of simple logic. If you've had an extraordinary season this year, you're not going to have an extraordinary season next year, because the whole point of the word extraordinary means it's a kind of one-off. So I think they'll have a good season, a reasonable season. I think we'll have a good, reasonable season. And if we can strengthen in the right places and we get a decent couple of forwards that can bang in the goals, and somebody decent at the back, I just think it'll be fairly tight next year. If they qualify for the Champions League and get the big Champions League money, we might have to revisit that. But I think we'll be pretty tight next year, and we might just sneak it.
Tony, I think Jim raises a lot of good points there, especially with regard to what our likely total points tally is going to be this season. It maybe puts into perspective that we've been playing at such a high standard over the last few years, and that a slight fall from that standard has maybe been viewed through a more pessimistic lens than it otherwise might have been. And hopefully next season we're much closer, if not ahead of Rangers, in making up that difference and overcoming them. But to pick up on the point about Europe, we're all kind of agreeing that depending on where the managerial appointment goes when it comes, we might be too late to make an impact on Europe this season. But what is it, do you think, that's been our major failings in Europe in recent years, and what do you think we can do to maybe, or what kind of things do we need to put in place to try and make more of an impact in Europe in years to come?
We've just never been prepared for Europe at all. We've never tooled up, as my fond of that expression. We've always brought in players after we've been bundled out of Europe in order to appease fans, and the horses bolted. You look at the calibre of club we've lost in Europe recently. Athens, Cluj, Malmo. Celtic should be capable of beating these teams because we're a better team. It comes too early. It doesn't come too early if you do the preparation and you get the right players in. That's for me. That's just that's kind of a lazy way of thinking. You have to prepare for these competitions, and you're not going in against mugs. But you're a prestigious club yourself. Be proud of who you are and go and fly the flag for your club in Europe, and preserve that historical name. Don't go in and be, not saying cannon fodder, but lose to teams where you end up embarrassed and humiliated. And Celtic just never ever seem to prepare for the Champions League in Europe. It's just, it's astonishing, really, because it comes round every year at the same time. It's not as if it creeps up on you. You know exactly what's happening. You know how many qualifiers you're going to have to play. So just prepare your team and get the best management structure, players, staff, playing squad that you can, and have a tilt at it every year. Because the riches you can get from advancing to the latter stages are, they're enormous. So why wouldn't you treat that competition with the reverence it deserves? You're never, well, the odds are you're never going to win it again, but let's go as far as we can. Why can't we go as far as they can in major European competition? And I'm talking about the Champions League. Gordon Strachan took them to the last 16 twice. Why is that beyond? Why has that been beyond any Celtic manager since? I find that.
That's why I'd also like to hear the vision. That's why I'd like also to hear the vision of the Celtic board, because I would say, you say things like, what's your 5-year plan? And I'd say, well, over the next 5 years, I'd expect to win the league 4 out of 5 times, and the 4th times we win it, I'd expect 3 of those times to get into the Champions League group stages, and in one of them I'd like to get to the last 16 or last 8 in the season. Every season we should at least drop down to the Europa, and I'd look to try and get to a quarter final. So what is the vision? What is the plan? So we can actually measure if we've been successful. Let's get back to that expectation thing again, because I think we've been appalling in Europe, and that is the measure. It's beating Hamilton Accies and Livingston and St Johnstone is all well and good, but is it much of an achievement? Not in my book. And if we can't beat some of the teams that Tony's mentioned, we're underachieving. And those are issues. And I think, just to echo Tony's points, that we don't plan ahead, we don't maybe buy the right players, maybe our tactics are particularly good, and that all starts from the top. And that's why I think the long-term vision thing is about, if we bring in somebody like Roy Keane, it'll be no different next year. If we bring in a completely new structure, new thinking, new vision, then maybe in a couple of years' time we've got a chance maybe of moving forward.
And see, some of those targets that you mentioned, Jim, they should be achievable targets for Celtic in those 5-year plans.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Last 16, maybe 1 year going to the last 8, or dropping into Europa League and get to a quarter final or a semi final. They are achievable targets for a club like Celtic. And see, if they're not, they should be. They should be on those at the top's agenda, saying we want to do this and we want to do this and we want to do that. Keep striving to be the best you can be. Keep saying it. And if it doesn't work,
also, that's the kind of things I would like to hear from the club. I'm not bothered about a lot of things that they say. I'd like to come and say, this is our vision. And then we the fans can actually measure whether they've been successful or not. Winning 9 in a row was fantastic, but it's a domestic squabble. That's all it is. The quadruple treble is brilliant. It's historical. But in the greater scheme of things, it doesn't really matter that much. If we got to the semi-final of the Europa or the last 8 of the Champions League, that would be phenomenal in this day and age. Absolutely phenomenal. And it would show whether they're on the right direction. And that's all I want, to go in the right direction.
I think it kind of ties in with what you've said before, Jim, is that, even to get to those stages, you're dealing with clubs with a lot more financial resource than we've got. But I'm totally in agreement that if we do make it into the Champions League group stages, I think actually the aim should be to drop into the Europa League after Christmas and at least have that going forward. Because once you get into the last 32, last 16 of a competition, it's, anything can happen. A few good results and you find yourself in the latter stages of the competition, and then it's less and less games till you can make an impact. So I think European football is where we should be looking at our targets being, assuming everything. And it comes back to another point as well, Tony. I'll ask you about this. I've seen a lot of people say, get the domestic success right and the European success will follow. I don't know that necessarily what we've seen in the last decade means that follows, one follows the other. Because we've had all the domestic success that we could have asked for, and we haven't had the European success. So why do you think that is? Is it the lack of preparation that you talked about, or is it just that we're just dealing with things on a completely different level?
Lack of preparation and planning. You don't need to. You don't need to plan too much for domestic success, do you?
Mm-hmm.
You don't. But you have to plan to make yourself a noise in Europe again. Methodically. You have to get it right and turn around and say, right, this is what we want from this season. If we win the title, we want to go to this round in Europe. And I think, getting to the group stage of the Champions League or beyond, or dropping into the Europa League and getting to the last 8, I think that should be a prerequisite for a club like Celtic, to be honest. I think you've got to set a high bar so that it sends a message to the players that this is what we deem as acceptable. And then Jim said the fans will decide whether it's been a failure or not. But as long as they're striving for that, and every year, and every player that goes through those glass doors is giving of their best and they're trying to achieve those targets, then I think the fans would accept that. Everybody would accept that. But see, this losing to Cluj and AEK Athens and, Malmo, and it's no disrespect to them. They came and beat us fair and square, Slavia Prague as well. But you say to yourself, well, they've beaten us because we've just no plan ahead. We've not thought. Europe's been somewhere in the ether for us because they were so obsessed by domestic success and getting the 10. Well, that's gone now. So it's a chance to just chart a new direction, plot a new pathway. And the pathway that Celtic fans want is Europe, because that's where the big money's made, that's where the big picture is, and that's where your name's made. And the Celtic fans are fed up, being, just treating as some other team. Teams actually want Celtic now in Europe because they think they can take them. That has to change. That culture and that attitude has to change. I want Celtic to become a name at Europe again.
I think also if you went to teams like Ajax and Porto and said, our ambition is to be in the Champions League, they'd say to you, I think you've set your bar a bit low there, guys. If that's your ambition, just to be in the Champions League. Because Ajax and Porto, these guys, are in there virtually every season. So, it's all about expectations. And as I said, it'd be good to know what the expectations of the board are. And then we, as I said, the fans can measure that success or otherwise.
Yeah, I think I got kind of laughed at one of my early appearances on the pod when I said that my dream would be that we are like an Ajax, that we don't always get to the latter stages of these competitions, but we are consistently there, and then on the odd occasion every few years we do go on a good run like they went on a few years ago. And okay, I think we are miles away from the semi-finals of the Champions League, but like I say, you never know what can happen, certainly in terms of Europa League level, and that maybe being more our standard. So we'll see what comes of that. Jim, I'll come to you just lastly before we wrap up the show. Assuming that, as we all agree, a manager is what we need first and foremost, or a director of football and head coach, whatever the structure is, do you anticipate the appointment being made, perhaps by this time next week? Things seem to be ramping up in terms of speculation, or do you think it's something that is going to take longer than that?
I think it will take longer. I think they know who it is, but they're waiting for the right time to announce who it is. Maybe after the next Glasgow derby, or after the Scottish Cup final in the showers, or whatever. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Well, on that note, we will leave you today. Thanks very much for all your comments, seeing them coming through. It's obviously been a big day, big news, sort of confirming that our captain will be leaving. We wish him all the best, obviously, and hopefully he can help us deliver one more trophy before he does go. And we will see you all next week. Obviously no game this weekend with the international break, but the bulletins will continue as normal. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Tony, before we go.
I wanted to bow out in a Peter Cook and Dudley Moore style by saying cheerio to Scott Brown. Goodbye, you're leaving. Bye.
Well, you do that and I'll just sit here and do the Brady.